All right, I say we kick it off. We're 3 minutes in. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I think my panelists are ready. James and Ty, you guys here? Ta-da! All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. We're going to be talking about measuring the true impact of your media and strategies for finding the true value of your Facebook awareness campaigns and media. However, a lot of this will apply to a variety of other platforms, and we're going to cover a lot of different tools and topics. First, I just wanted to introduce who's joining me today on this call. We have Ty Schwartz, who is our product manager and lead developer of our Geo Match Market testing experiments. Hey, Ty.
Hi, everyone.
And we have James Gerber, who is our VP of product and lead of our analytics team, who equally is part and parcel to our Geo Testing process and handles a lot of the consultation and analytics work around those Geo Tests. Hey, James.
Hey, everybody.
And we have Pri, who is behind the scenes, keeping us all on track and helping us with all of our interactive activities today. We're going to skip most of the introduction about us. You can find a lot of information about Measured on our website. We have a lot of insights to cover today, so we're going to jump right into it. Here's a quick look at our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about the platform reporting problem and the challenges in the industry today and why platform measurement has some pretty significant challenges. We're going to talk about what geo testing is, geo match market testing, how it works, how to think about it. We're going to walk through a Facebook awareness case study example from one of our brands about how they use geotesting to uncover insights about their Facebook media. We're going to talk about some best practices around geotesting that you can take with you. And then Ty is going to walk us through a brand search, a geo brand search test design example in our platform. Following that, we will have some Q&A. We had a lot of great questions last time. Please, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can leave them in the chat. Additionally, you could wait until the end, and we will make sure we leave ample time to answer all of your questions. And we'll get it going. The premise of today's conversation, and a big reason for why we exist and why Measured feels so strongly about the different testing methods that we deploy, is that platform attribution is broken. Platform reporting has been a challenge for a lot of marketers for a long time, depending on the area of the funnel, the channel, certain situations regarding your particular business. There's a lot of reasons why platform reporting and attribution has been a struggle. Most notably, the privacy law changes over the last several years that we've all have known have been coming for a while now, have really started to take a hold and affect each platform's ability to really see through to the conversion and track users across the web. MTA, multi-touch attribution, last touch attribution, historically the dominant methodology for marketers for a very long time. But its user tracking requirement makes it nearly impossible in today's world to get true understanding and a complete view of what's happening after someone sees a particular ad and as they go to make a purchase or place an order or whatever your other conversion type may be. So long story short, MTA can no longer track every touch point. And this is not just having happened and now it's here, it's continuing to evolve and change over time across different platforms and in many different ways. James, any thoughts here on the industry component right now and what marketers are feeling as they come to you asking about different types of testing and measurement, or how reliant they are on their current methodologies?
Yeah, I mean, if you guys have attended, Measured webinars in the past, we used to be able to say pretty resoundingly that vendors over-reported, and they would claim credit for more than they deserved in almost all cases. That has changed. The answer is no longer as simple as all vendors over-report. It's different even within each vendor, depending on the tactic and the strategy you're deploying. And so it's gotten messier in the last 12 months, if you can believe that. It was already messy to begin with. It's gotten even messier. And so it really has emphasized the need to have an independent measurement methodology that you can leverage.
And truth be told, we are not the only ones shouting this from the rooftops anymore. Facebook, actually, I'm not sure if other folks on the call have seen it, but a couple of weeks ago took out a full page article in the Drum, now as Meta, talking about the challenges of last click measurement. It actually highlighted conveniently a study that showed that last click models were undervaluing marketing performance on Facebook and Instagram by 47% on average. Now, it's a lot easier for them to come out and say their performance is better than they're able to report on. But we find in our testing that while that's true in some cases or in some areas of the funnel, for upper funnel media, for example, now we're finding a lot of examples where Facebook is underreporting by a lot, but it's not always the case. There's not a hard and fast line on whether or not a particular platform is going to underreport or overreport. There are a variety of factors. A quick sneak peek at a really cool stat. We will be pushing out an annual D2C marketer survey. We recently completed with a survey partner, a survey with 300 D2C marketers across the spectrum from different verticals, different company sizes, different roles. And one insightful stat is that 2/3 of D2C brands are still using last touch or multi-touch attribution as their primary measurement methodology. You can see here, other forms are starting to, or MMM probably not going to be a dominant form in the future, but still leveraged by a lot. Maybe not as their primary form. Site-side analytics, web traffic, still important. But we expect to see this change, and we're excited to publish this stat year over year and see how that changes. We'd like to do a quick poll question for those in the audience, just to get a sense of some of the folks on the call. How do you primarily measure your marketing performance? Are you using platform vendor reporting? Are you doing multi-touch attribution in some form? Are you using incrementality testing? Or are you doing any in-house modeling or measurement? You should see that pop up on your screen. And we'll give everybody a second to put in their answers. Looks like the answers are starting to roll in. A few more seconds here. All right. And the results seem to be pretty similar to our survey. I'm not sure if, I think everybody should be able to see that on their screen, but platform vendor reporting, still 54% saying that's their primary form of measurement. Love seeing incrementality measurement higher up there at 18%, in-house modeling, other. Great, so that's a pretty good split. Thanks for sharing, everybody. All right. Moving right along, James, let's go a little deeper into why platform reporting is broken. What's the attribution problem that we're facing? What's going on?
Yeah, so, very, very high level here. It's gotten hard to track people over long periods of time. And so every day that goes by, post the impression or post the click, it's harder to track that user. As a result, look back windows are shrinking. Facebook shrunk their look back windows when iOS 14 rolled out, but everyone has effectively lost the ability to track as many conversions over as long a period of time as before. So the look back windows make it very difficult for marketers to track performance over time. And it's hit certain parts of your funnel in a different way than other parts. And we'll go into those details, but it depends on how long it takes for the user to convert. And that's why it's very, very messy. Last touch metrics also have become, in general, much less reliable. You used to, as I mentioned, be able to say fairly with confidence that everything is being over-reported. That's no longer the case. You might even find that within a single tactic, like Facebook prospecting, over time, maybe they were underreporting and then they start overreporting, and it could go back and forth. There are a lot of dynamics in place. Lastly, all of that reporting from the vendors is not really connected to your source of truth transactions. A lot of you have probably experienced this when you're showing finance, your performance, right? And you're reporting stats out of Facebook or stats out of AdWords, even if you're using Google Analytics. They're not going to match up with what your finance team is reporting. And that's an issue. And it's an issue in both justifying additional media budget, but also connecting your media spend to your financial performance.
So James, another way to put that is that if you took all the last touch conversions that your platforms are taking credit for and added them up, would you say it's highly unlikely or almost never the case that they align to the actual conversions reported in your source of truth? And when we say source of truth, we mean your e-com platform or wherever you're recording actual sales.
I mean, they very rarely will line up. As we like to say, a broken clock is right twice a day. So, just because these two may line up does not mean that you are accurately tracking the vendor side. It could happen to line up, but that doesn't mean it's accurate.
Got it. So essentially the unreliability of platform reporting means that you could be theoretically making business decisions on data that's not truly representative of your business performance. Obviously, marketers have a long-ranging and wide variety of skills. Both recognizing that there's more art than science here sometimes, and there's certainly capabilities that people have to take a look at those numbers and say, okay, I have a sense for what this means in relation to my sales. But generally, would you say it's reasonably unreliable, or
It's very unreliable. It might happen to be accurate against the real value occasionally, but that's more of a random happenstance than a sign that you can use vendor reporting. And it's both under and over reporting in different areas of your funnel on different vendors and on different tactics, and it will change over time. And so because of that dynamic nature and the unreliability of vendor reporting, it emphasizes how important it is to be testing it, because you cannot just rely on a unstable ground anymore.
And that's another interesting point you made, which is that it's not just over-reporting by a certain amount across the board or under-reporting by a certain amount across the board. It's different depending on the tactic, the program, the channel, things like that.
Time of day, time to like when in your media mix are you testing, and all these things will change over time. And that's why, testing isn't a one-time exercise.
Got it. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about incrementality. We're going to use this word a lot. We know there's probably a lot of people on the call who understand this concept and are familiar with it, but we want to make sure that we express this in a way that people can understand. So if you think about the total conversions reported out of your source of truth, whether that be a Shopify, for example, here, within that total volume of conversions, each of your platforms is going to be taking credit for a certain percentage of those. And the percentage of those that they take credit for is typically either over-reported or under-reported, depending on a variety of factors. As we mentioned, the area of the funnel you're working in, or particular privacy changes that happen to have occurred recently. In this example, we're showcasing, and again, this is just an example, it's a little over-exaggerated to illustrate the point. But in this example, pre-iOS 14.5, it was really common for Facebook to over-report performance because they were taking credit for a lot of conversions where, or to put it another way, they may not have been accounting for conversions that would have happened anyway, had someone seen the ad and then converted. So they ended up actually taking more credit than was typically due when we ran our incrementality tests. Now in the post-iOS environment or iOS 14 environment, we do find an increasingly common phenomenon where Facebook is underreporting because their very short look-back windows do not enable them to see enough of the data to take credit where it is due. And incrementality measurement enables you to identify through an A/B test, as we'll discuss later, for example, a geo holdout test, what happens when we either have or don't have this media in play, and what is the effect, the true contribution on the actual business performance. James, any other call outs here?
Yeah, I mean, just to emphasize how messy the situation is now, Facebook is no longer tracking anywhere close to 100% of the universe, as everyone knows, right? On a previous slide, Clay, you noted that like 25% of Facebook iOS users are opting into tracking. So they've lost track of 75% of that universe. That's not the whole universe, but it's a big chunk of the universe. So they're probably over-reporting on the percentage of the universe they track. That's still the case. But now they're not tracking a huge portion of the total. And so when you net these two things out, you end up with over or under reporting depending on the ratios and how those things work out, but it's very dynamic and it's not consistent. It's not even consistent on a single tactic you might test, throughout the year.
Got it. Thanks. So James, walk us through this chart. So a quick insight on what we tended to see across the majority of our clients in the pre versus post iOS 14 world. How has privacy affected Facebook? And the most important question, has the value of the media changed in light of those changes that have happened?
Great questions. There's a lot of factors. This is not a simple, easy space to explain. What we saw when iOS 14 rolled out is Facebook decided to change how they report conversions. They used to report conversions up to 30 days after the impression and the click. And then overnight, a flip switched. And they went to only reporting conversions up to 7 days after the click and only up to 1 day after the impression. That was a major regime change in Facebook's reported value. And that's what this blue line is. That's Facebook's reported CPA. The orange line is the incremental CPA that was measured through testing. And so despite the change in how the vendor reports conversions in early April 2021, the value of the media did not change. And that's when, that's the incremental CPA metric. That's the orange line. That was stable. And so marketers who were leaning on vendor reporting were freaking out because everything looked dramatically worse overnight. Marketers that were measuring incrementality knew that it was simply a change in the denominator of that equation, which is what the vendor reports, and that the incremental value of the media was stable. Now, since this, CPMs have also dramatically increased. And so that led to an increase in the incremental CPA as well. But that came after this pivot on attribution reporting.
Got it. Thanks, James. So long story short, in terms of Facebook's ability to report the data, the media became more expensive because they weren't necessarily able to attribute to all the performance. However, the value of the actual media, its impact when someone sees that ad and then decides to either not go purchase something or not, the actual value of the media wasn't changing in terms of its contribution to business outcomes.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of theories as to why Facebook CPMs have increased pretty steadily over the last 12 months. It's certainly not helping their stock, but you could argue would be in a worse place if not for those increases. So, are those related to the iOS 14 changes? Right. Perhaps. Are they not? It's hard to tell.
Got it. Good point. So this is a representation of our tests over time, because a lot of people will ask us, well, how different are the results? How common is it that Facebook is underreporting or overreporting? And again, these are not just Facebook. This is actually across a variety of different platforms. As an example, this stat in particular. We know today's topic is about Facebook, but we geotest a ton of different channels across the funnel for different marketers. But interestingly, over half of our geotests results show that last touch reporting is at least 50% or 50% under reported. So essentially the spread of how different the results are from the true contribution of the media, at least half of them are 50% over or 50% under, and then a variety across the spectrum. James, any comments there?
Yeah, I mean, if we had done this chart 5 years ago, most of the dots would be below 100%. That's been the major change over the last couple of years, is that a lot of times vendors actually underreport now.
Because they have kind of a loss of data and visibility.
Yes, yeah, they lost visibility into an increasingly large share of the population, to be honest.
Got it. Thanks. So we're going to do a quick poll question one more time. Thanks for everybody who participated last time. Please jump on and submit your answer. Have you seen vendor reported CPAs increase significantly in the last 12 months? We're curious to know if media costs have been a major factor in your business, and if your acquisition costs have increased significantly. Every time I say we're going to get the Jeopardy music, I kind of remember for next time. All right. Poll number 2, have you seen the vendor reported CPAs increase significantly over the last 12 months? Not sure. 14%, no one said no. So they've definitely not decreased for anybody, but 86% said yes. So I would say this is, a significant factor in marketers who are having to make business decisions around where to put their money and the media that they spend. I'm assuming this doesn't surprise you, James.
It doesn't surprise me. And I just want to note here, guys, when we talk about the incremental CPA, which I mean, if possible, that is what everyone should be focusing on, is the actual value of the media, right? So if you look at that incremental CPA, the factors in that are the incrementality percentage, the CPM, the cost of the media, and the conversion rate. Now, when your CPAs go up, how do you know which one what are the factors, right? You have to measure the incrementality to know. And so you know when the CPM is going up, you know when your conversion rates are changing. You also need to know when the incrementality is moving around.
Got it. Thanks. Okay, so we're going to move on a little bit to how we test this. How do we find incrementality? What are the methods we do so? One of them, one of our most popular methods for doing so is GeoMatch market testing, which we deploy across a variety of platforms, all across different campaigns across the funnel. Ty, you built this product for us. You're an expert in GeoMatch market testing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about just the benefits of geotesting and why it's a great fit for this challenge?
Sure. One of my favorite topics. Okay, so the first bullet point, which is test against your source of truth transaction data, is really I would say the most important. We are not in the world of, you're not dependent on any platform, you're not dependent on any reporting or window conversions. This is literally, as James was saying before, you can match the results to what your finance team is seeing. And so you're have more confidence because you're anchored on data that you control and that you own. The second is kind of a byproduct of the first. So things change. We saw this with iOS 14. There could be other changes. Different platforms might pull the rug under your feet. And so this way you really are just independent and are not reliant on any changes or any movements in privacy or really any tracking differences. And the third is that it's extremely flexible. So and this is a big point versus like platform lift test or anything of that sort. Those are specific to a certain platform, whether it's Google or Facebook or Snap or Pinterest. There's like a dozen of them. Geo is something that, since it's anchored on your data, it could be deployed really anywhere that has geo-targeting as an option.
Awesome. Thanks, Ty. Would you mind walking folks through who may not be familiar how a simple example works? In this example, we'll talk about a geo holdout. And I just want to call out, we are getting some great questions in on the chat. We will circle back and answer those kind of out loud for everybody to hear once we get through the slides. So thank you for bringing those questions in. We look forward to more of those coming in. But yeah, Ty, walk us through a holdout test. What does that mean and how does it work?
Sure. So this is just the basics of geo testing methodology. It is centered across the fact that we use counterfactuals by having a predictor market and a predictee market, which we're going to call anchor is going to be the predictor and test is going to be the predictee. So this really starts with the market selection. Your geotesting is only as good as your market selection. If you don't have good market selection, then you will get noisy results. So this is done by analyzing training data of 1 to 2 years. And what we aim to do is set the anchor markets and then find markets that are highly correlated to those anchor markets. And those would be the test markets. After we establish correlation, we can now deploy the test and the treatment. Since we're talking about a holdout test, the treatment is going to be just withholding spend from any test market that is part of the test. So you can see in this map, the blue is going to be your national, which is the anchor. That's going to be the predictor. You're going to use it to predict the counterfactuals. And the color states are the test markets. So these are going to be the ones that are going to receiving the holdout treatment. You flight the test for 30 days, and then you go to the results, which are on the right-hand side. So you can see the blue line is the anchor states, which is similar to the national. And then the 2 lines beneath it are the observed and the predicted. So the observed is what's happened in the test markets. Because it's a holdout, we expect it to fluctuate downwards. We expect to lose conversions because we withheld spend. And then we're going to use the blue line to predict the counterfactual, meaning what would have happened given no treatment. And so the difference between the dotted line and the red line is essentially the lifted conversions, meaning conversions that we lost due to the treatment, and we can attribute to this tactic or media spend or whatever it is that we design the test at. So once we get the contribution, we can back into incrementality and apply that with coefficients that marketers can use in their portfolio.
Awesome. Thanks, Ty. So to kind of summarize, we are essentially finding certain geography markets in this example at the state level, but that could change depending on the scale of the test. You could do more granular at the zip level or larger at the DMA level. But essentially, you're finding smaller geographic markets that are highly representative or correlate to the actual market that you're trying to test. In this case, the national footprint. You do this by looking and kind of analyzing historical data for 1 to 2 years to find markets that are highly correlated. Then you use those markets as test markets where you will actually withhold the media what's where the term holdout comes from. And from that, you're able to measure the impact of the media in terms of the, in this case, drop in performance from that particular smaller test market. And then because the correlation is highly predictable, you can then take that and like turn it into an incrementality coefficient or an actual impact value that you can apply across the rest of your media. Is that about right?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. We did have a good question in here that I will get to right now. Ty, maybe you want to answer this one just because it's relevant to this particular slide. How do you ensure apples to apples comparisons, even different states could have different context, which could influence results? So how do you know that the states you're using are correlated?
Okay, great question. And it also ties back to what I said before. Your Geo Test is only as good as your market selection. So the best way to make sure that you're choosing the right test markets is having sufficient data to train on. I've been seeing brands or hearing brands that are using, last few months, 6 months, 8 months. You really want to have at least 1 year to make sure that if there are any seasonal effects, any trends that we're seeing that are just annual, you catch those. So ideally, we like to have 2 years of data. And based on that 2 years of data and how that market trends in terms of conversion rate and a bunch of other factors that we bake into our market selection process, we have a ranking, we have an algorithm that ranks the test markets. And so we always select the best, the highest ranked test markets to ensure that they're as close as possible. And then we do a validation by running the prediction model on those test markets to make sure that the error between the prediction and the actual historically is as low as possible.
Awesome. Thanks, Ty. All right, we're going to keep cruising just because we got a lot of content. I want to make sure we get through, but we will get to the other questions. Really appreciate those coming in. Thank you. So looking at an example, let me just make sure I didn't skip a slide here. Okay, great. So we had a recent client example. Ty, you want to help me walk through this one? Tell us a little bit about this brand and what their challenge was and what they came to us to understand.
Okay, I'm going to start with the TLDR just because I feel everyone is going to look at it. Yes, the incrementality came extremely high for this client. There are a bunch of factors that went into this, and I'm going to cover it. I will say that not all tests come with such a high incrementality. This is kind of like on the high end of our spread of results. So I just wanted to address it before I start. So the brand that we tested is a luxury goods brand. And the reason it's important to note is that it's a high order value. And so there's a longer sales cycle. These brands are exactly the brands that are going to suffer more from these changes, meaning the look back windows have become more difficult. They become shorter. So anything with a longer consideration cycle, anything with a more difficult conversion process is going to have an even less ability to report versus if you're just buying something that's very day to day, that's like a click on ad and buy on the same like session, maybe even. Okay. So there were, on top of that, there were other challenges. First of all, this is a brand that is not evenly spread across the United States. They do have retail stores. And so obviously in areas that they had a retail store that people could go in and look at the product, conversions were higher. And we were very mindful to make sure that when we choose the zip code, this was done at a zip code level, then that when we choose the zip codes, we make sure that we're not over or under indexing. So in that, which means we're not selecting the zip codes that are only closest to the retail store or farthest away from the retail store. So the cell had to represent a true national combo mix. So we had an even amount of what we called market penetration. So zip codes that had high, medium, or average and low market penetration. Okay, I'm just seeing the questions as they come. And the last challenge was, I mean, as you expect, this specific brand suffered more than others on like post iOS 14. So it was just a very natural candidate for testing. They were interested in testing their Facebook awareness tactic. So that was the design. The design was on 83 zip codes that were used as anchor states. Just to remind everyone, anchor states are going to be the predictors, and 123 zip codes that were a test market, meaning they withheld spend. I'm just going to note that the 83 zip codes are the most revenue generating. So they are bigger and stable, even if they seem smaller in number of, like in count of zip codes. So all this talk, and now for the results. Once the test was flighted for 30 days, we looked at the effect on the test markets, and we saw that the markets moved negatively because it was a holdout. So it's as expected by over 6%, which is a really strong result. It indicates that there was a strong causal connection between Facebook awareness and what is happening in your actual sales, in your actual business. Once we took it to the national level, we interpreted it into incremental conversions, and then we compared it to the vendor conversions. And we saw that the vendor conversions were really underreporting by quite a lot, 413%, if we're trying to be accurate. And so this generated an entire understanding and data-driven conversation on, does this tactic have room to scale? What would be, is there potential place to grow this tactic, spend more while still hitting your performance goals? And Clay, do you want to talk about the action items from this test, or?
Yeah, I think just to highlight really quick, the net is that Facebook was significantly underreporting their awareness. And as James mentioned early on, awareness is notoriously one of the hardest areas of the funnel to measure. And then this is kind of compounded by several factors. In this case being one, the particular iOS challenges, the privacy challenges, Facebook's really short look back windows, compounded with the fact that this is a luxury goods brand who has an awareness cycle that is a lot longer, within that 30-day window on average, but longer than a lot of other brands who may have a much shorter conversion cycle. So that exacerbates Facebook's inability to report accurately, which is why you see a higher number on this type of brand for their true incremental contribution when compared to the vendor reported numbers. And Ty, next step for that brand, looks like they're considering a scale test, a geo scale test. So going to simulate larger spend in some markets to find an optimal level, how far they can scale into that tactic and still meet their goals.
Yes, and James, you can jump in to talk about this, because I know you also spoke to the client. This finding really resulted in, well, can we spend more and still achieve our incremental performance metrics, whether it's CPAI or OSI? And so the answer is we're going to launch a scale test on this tactic specifically, and we're going to try to see how far can we push spend while still retaining the performance goals.
Awesome. And the other component to note is just, had the brand not really performed an incrementality experiment, they would still be basing decisions based on what Facebook was reporting, which was, a fourth of what is really being contributed by them in this instance.
I think that's the biggest thing. They were using, I think 80% were saying that they were using, or maybe it was 60% that they were using vendor reporting. They were one of those brands that used vendor reporting. And so by doing it, they really had a lot of potential opportunity that's just left on the table and not being utilized.
Awesome. We had a couple questions that are kind of specific to this particular test. What percentage of sales for the market is normally withheld? So is there a general amount that a brand needs to kind of withhold in order to perform a holdout test? Depends on the scale. I know it's probably it depends type of answer.
So it depends if it's a scale or a holdout. It depends on the granularity as well. But typically our cells will be around 10% of the like US. So we will withhold spend on just 10% of the country, roughly.
For whatever length of test you're performing.
Yes.
So that would be, for example, 28 days or something like that.
Yep.
Got it. Great. Okay, great. Keep cruising along here. I know we have a lot of other questions. We will get to those at the end for sure. Couple testing tips. Ty, do you want to just give some best practice? I think these actually answer some of the other questions people have coming in about designing or running a geotest.
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the questions at all. Just focused
Okay.
on the deck, but let me just walk through this. So the first and foremost, it sometimes seems not obvious, but it is. The media has to be geo-targetable. You cannot run a geotest if you cannot geo-target. So that's first. Second, the KPI, which is on the other end, what you're reporting on needs to have a geo marker. So you need to be able to understand whether it's leads, conversions, whatever it is, subscriptions, you need to see them broken down by a geo dimension. Third point is not controversial, but you can go back and forth on it. It's best to keep spend consistent as much as you can. So while there is value in testing in a promo period because you want to understand the incrementality then or during a sales season, it's whatever you're testing, whether it's sale or not sale, it should ideally be consistent. So we're not adding more variables that can throw off the predictions and changing the spend regime. Consideration cycle is a big deal. So you know your product the best, more than us for sure. If your product has a longer consideration cycle, then your test needs to encompass it. So if it takes 2 weeks for it's actually not a good example, but let's keep that example. If it takes 2 weeks for your user to decide to purchase, then your test has to be at least 2 weeks. If it takes 6 weeks, if it's like a very expensive product that has a lot of market research, or if it's like children or parent oriented where they like compare a lot of different options, then you have to have a longer test period. Granularity is something that we've been getting a lot of questions on. Granularity is a function of volume. So GeoTest is anchored on volume. You need to have a lot of weekly sales per geo market. If you have a lot of sales, then you could go all the way down to the zip level. If you don't have as much, then you should stay at the DMA or state level. Currently, most of our tests are at the DMA or state level because it's our go-to and it's currently the most stable. But for clients that we see that have a really large sales volume, we do start introducing zip level testing. And this is, I know, James's favorite topic. There are a lot of business questions that you can ask that will bring value. And so every test that you launch will answer a business question. Business questions can change in different times of year, and also seasonality can affect incrementality and your performance. So you should definitely be running multiple cells at different times of the year to answer different business questions based on your needs.
Awesome. So a lot of considerations, but long story short, needs to be geo-targetable. You need to be able to report on a geo basis, again, because geo-targeting does not rely on user tracking. We don't really care who the users are in particular. We just need to be able to target the media or hold out the media in a particular geography and then report on the business outcome in that particular geography, sales or web traffic or conversions or otherwise. Consideration cycles, test lengths, all important and vary depending on the business and the business needs. Thanks, Ty. So I think now, Ty, are you going to walk us through a brand search holdout design?
Sure. I always like to take an opportunity in webinars just to go through the product to get people acquainted with it and see how it flows, really. So
awesome. And sorry about that. I don't know why my slide is glitching here a little bit, but let me stop sharing and send it over to you, Ty.
Okay, so we're going to start with the most, let's say, basic test that we typically start with, which is a brand search holdout. It's really important to say that before we start to designing a test, there is a discovery process. James, I don't know if you want to kind of double down on that, but it's really important to understand what's the business question that we're trying to answer. Specifically with a brand search holdout test, the question is typically, is brand search incremental? Meaning if we turn it off, do the conversions just come in through organic, and then you don't have to pay what a lot of people call the Google tax, which is just bidding on your search terms.
Awesome. Oh yeah, you're pulling up your screen, right?
Yeah. James, do you want to add anything to the discovery process while I set it up?
Yeah, it's about, as much as anything, it's about prioritization. Marketers that come and work with Measured often bring dozens of business questions they want to answer. What's the value of this? What's the marginal return if I spend 2x? What's this or what that other thing? So it really is about prioritization and getting the most bang for your testing buck.
Awesome.
All right, I'll start and I'll kind of explain as I walk through. So this is going to be a brand search holdout. I'm choosing the conversion type. Again, as I said before, it needs to be a conversion type that you can report at a geo breakdown. You choose this split level. I'm going to go with state for here. The duration, again, you could do different durations based on volume and time to conversion. I'm going to keep it at 4, which is the standard. And you can add your average order value. And we're going to start. So the designer has capabilities to support, as of now, 4 cells. And as James said before, we go into this process after a discovery session, understanding what is it that we want to ask and what is it that we want to learn. Every business question that you have is going to be assigned to a cell. So that cell is going to test part of your market in order to answer that business question. In this case, we're going to do test brand out. Okay. And I'm just gonna add words. It's gonna take a second. While it pulls through the API, all the campaigns that are part of this account's Google Ads, I'm just gonna show that I'm on the holdout treatment and I'm gonna select brand. Yep. Okay, next. Now is the data science part. So I'm going to loop it into my previous explanation. This is the past 2 years of transactions per geo on a weekly breakdown, analyzed and identifying what are the anchor markets and what are the test markets that have the highest correlation per the anchor markets. Okay, so it's going to happen all automatically in the background. So it already identified my top markets. These are going to be your top revenue generating markets. And this is a list of anything that's not a top market. It doesn't mean that all of these are going to be used. It's just a step to allow you to deselect a specific market if you don't want to use that market. But it's always recommended to use all of them and allow the tool to pick the best ranked and highest correlated markets. So I'm just going to approve, and it's allocating the markets. You can see that 5 markets were selected from the long list. These are the 5 markets. So these have proved the highest correlation to our previous anchor markets. And basically you have a bunch of stats on what's the expected lift, what's the reference cost that we use, different details. This is the cell contribution. What I was saying before, it's typically in the 10%. So this is what you're going to test on. And then that's about it. You're ready to launch it.
Awesome. Thanks, Ty. So you just kind of walked through the design of one cell. Would you agree that most of our tests tend to be multi-cell tests? And can you just re-explain for folks, what do we really mean by a cell? Is each cell its own test, or how do you think about that?
Yes. So if a client wants to test, let's say, Facebook awareness as a holdout and as a scale, meaning what is the incrementality of Facebook awareness, which is going to be a holdout cell, a holdout treatment. That's going to be one cell. And then the other question is, do I have room to scale? Meaning, what is my incremental performance, marginal incremental performance look at a certain scale level? So we're going to use the other cell at a scale, and then we can design to push it to a certain amount of spend that we want to check, a spend regime. And then the results of those cells, when we look at it, how the markets in the holdout cell versus how the markets in the scale cell changed based on the treatment, and then compare it to the counterfactual that is given by the anchor markets, is how we can utilize the tool to ask more business questions at a time and really flight at this point 4 at a time.
Awesome. Thank you. And you get to kind of utilize the market selection process and kind of get more bang for your buck in terms of time you're spending and being able to execute more than one test.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thanks, Ty. We have had so many questions come in. Thank you so much for everybody. James, I appreciate you firing away on the chat room, answering all these questions. Before we get into the Q&A, just one last, I think 1 or 2 more slides here. Just wanted to talk about, different ways to get into geo testing. We recognize that different brands have different budgets and different capabilities. And we just wanted to highlight that, we generally encourage all brands to test and experiment and measure, regardless of whether it's, with us or somebody else. We want brands to continue to ask these questions because they're really important and we frankly find them really insightful. We have started to get questions from some brands. Hey, I've seen some geo test capabilities pop up, in other places, or, I noticed Facebook in that Meta article we just highlighted from the Drum called out their GeoLift practice that you can go to. And we want to just call out a few components of these and how to think about them in relation to something like what Measured offers from an independent perspective. Obviously, the most clear difference is that, being inherently neutral as an independent partner gives you certain advantages in terms of measuring across multiple channels and using possibly more rigorous testing methods. And then, of course, testing from a particular platform, you have to be just aware of what is being tested and how it's being tested and the rigor with which it's being performed. Typically, independent can be higher cost. There can be more cost to the Geo Test framework, making sure that all of your data is connected. It's part of the capability of these tools is that they're hooked up to everything. And as Ty just walked through, in about 5 minutes, you can execute all the data science required to perform a comprehensive market selection process based on a couple of years of data. However, certain platform-based protocols and testing may be more affordable or more accessible. Some of them are actually open source, which is actually pretty cool. And we encourage people to check those out as well. Lastly, I think the important component here is the ability to test across multiple channels. Ty just mentioned you can have multiple cells testing across, for example, YouTube, Google, and Facebook all in one geo test, which is kind of useful both for saving time and creating comparative insights. But then additionally, recognizing that within those particular platform-based tests, you're going to be limited to just that one channel and one methodology, which may not be comparable to other channels. And that context is often really, really important. Oh, am I not sharing my screen? Oh, shoot. Sorry, guys. Here you go. Now you can see my nice little table here. Just again, comparing independent and platform geotests. And lastly, highlighting that a lot of the platform-based geotests that we see popping up are requiring some level of data science capabilities internally or analytics capabilities. A lot of them are self-service, built in R and other code languages that require some level of expertise. But again, if you have the capabilities to utilize these tests, we encourage you to experiment and test in any way that you can. And we do find that our best practices that we highlighted earlier should still apply to most of these test frameworks. James, anything else you want to kind of highlight here, or Ty, around how to get into geotesting if you are new to it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things you can do if you can write code in R and Python. But if that's not something you're comfortable with, or if you don't have people on staff that are comfortable with that, you have to look elsewhere. And companies like Measured are helping to fill that gap.
Got it. Makes sense. So level of difficulty, definitely something to keep in mind. Okay, now we are officially at the question and answer section. Blaze through it. There's a lot of information. We've got 8 solid minutes until our official time is over. But James, were there any questions that you answered in the chat that you felt were particularly relevant or interesting to other folks on the call? And then I'll scroll through and just see if we missed any others or we're not able to answer anyone's in particular.
Yeah, I just want to note that when we talk about measuring upper funnel channels, we're still measuring them on low funnel KPIs, transactions or orders, or leads or subscriptions or whatever it is at the bottom of the funnel that your business is focusing on. That is what upper funnel tactics are measured on. They're just upper funnel in the nature of the targeting and the strategy.
Got it. Awesome.
We had another good question of, do you need to serve dummy ads to markets you're holding out ads from in a geo holdout test? And the answer is no. It's one of the benefits of geo testing. In other kind of split tests, if you guys have ran tests on Trade Desk or Roku or other platforms, you'll frequently have to use PSA ads on your control group that allows you to track the control group. That's not required in geo testing. Everything in geo testing is measured on transactions by geo, and so there is no user tracking at all.
Awesome, thanks. Looking through the questions here for some other ones that we got in our Q&A. How much performance history do I need before I consider running a geo test? Could this be run for a brand who's just now launching or at launch?
I was just about to answer it. James, go ahead.
You would need around 6 months of data to build the correlations at measure. Different companies might have different answers to that question. We require 6 months of data to define how geos are correlated. So we would recommend if you're a new business within the last 6 months, we have other solutions for you at measure that can help you understand the likely incrementality absent testing. And then within 6 months, you'll be ready for geo testing.
I would also add that if you're a new brand, I would expect a lot of your media efforts to be more incremental, just because you have no awareness whatsoever, and no one really knows your brand. So it's likely that people who are buying your brand are coming through media efforts. So I think the pain point is it's also for new brands, not to say that it's not, but it gets more painful for brands that have a lot of channels and they're not sure which channel is really moving the needle for the business, and so where they want to double down when they plan their portfolio spend.
Awesome, thanks, Ty. Another question that I see you were just starting to type an answer to in the Q&A. Does incrementality differ across different channels or across your media mix? And is that measurement able to be captured by geo testing? So how does, James, that's probably a great question for you. How does incrementality change across channels, and is there good or bad incrementality? Do you want to just give an overview of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a performance marketer at heart. And so in my opinion, if there's any incremental sales available, it's worth some amount of money. So there is no such thing as a bad incrementality or a good incrementality, as long as the incrementality is above zero. If it's zero, that is bad. You should not be marketing that. But it's almost always never zero. And so the question is, what's the right cost given the incremental sales you can get from that channel? And that's really the challenge, is assigning the right cost and then grabbing as much as you can from that channel.
And is incrementality comparable, to kind of tack on to that question, comparable across channels? Going back to how it may differ across channels, and how should somebody think about incrementality when they're creating goals for their business?
Yeah, incrementality percentage is not a again, it's a number that reflects in as much as what the incremental value is as what the vendor reports. And so, some of those slides earlier on the presentation were demonstrating that the incremental value could be stable and your inc percentage could dramatically change simply because the vendor's reporting changed. And so that's why there's no such thing as a good or a bad inc. When Facebook, rolled out those changes on post iOS 14, all the inks went up. Does that mean Facebook was better than before? No, it means that they changed how they were reporting.
Got it. And another question that just came in kind of following on that, can we have incrementality goals, for example, for top of the funnel metrics? And how would you test for that? Yeah, James, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a good question. You should have incremental CPA goals or incremental ROAS goals, but you shouldn't have incrementality goals, right? Because again, when the vendor changes what they report, the inc percentage will change. That does not mean that the value of the media is changing. Incrementality is incredibly important way to level set the reporting across channels and vendors. But there's no such thing as a good or a bad ink. And so, when setting goals on incrementality is not recommended because the vendor's reporting will change and the incrementality changes as a result. And it doesn't mean good or bad things. It just means there's a new regime and there's a new reality that you need to level set against.
And that's a great point, because what you can, tying this connection back to how to use it, you can apply that incrementality coefficient, as we call it, to a particular business metrics. You can say, at this level of incrementality, my CPA is now adjusted to give me the true cost of the cost to acquire that particular consumer, given the actual contribution of the media, which we uncovered via incremental experimentation. Does that make sense?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, and we have a lot of clients that come in and say, well, incremental CPA is a new concept to me, or incremental ROAS is a new concept to me. What should be my incremental CPA target, or what should be my incremental ROAS target? That's where finance comes in. Finance has a pretty good idea of how much they want to pay per new customer, right? There's lifetime value considerations. There are factors that go in, but usually finance has some sense of what they want to pay to acquire new customers. And so that really is the answer to that question, right? It's how much you want to pay to acquire customers. That's what that incremental ROAS or incremental CPA should reflect.
Awesome. Thanks, James. Thank you, Ty. Thanks, Pri. I think that's all the questions. I don't know if we missed any. We'll go back through them, and if we did, we will make sure to reach out and follow up with those. We did leave our emails at the beginning of the slide. I will just pull those up one more time for people to take down in case they want to reach out with more specific questions. You can see them right here. Our first names at measured.com, but please feel free to reach out. Thank you for joining our session today. We look forward to having more insights to bring you in the future, and we look forward to following these trends going forward. Thank you, everybody. And Pri, I think we're going to send out a copy, a link to the recording following the session and any associated materials as well. So keep an eye out for that. Thanks, James. Thanks, Ty.
Thanks, everybody, for attending.
Thanks, everyone.